Some secrets are buried so deep that when they surface, they don't just crack your world, they detonate it. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who checks his wife's phone. 6 years of marriage to Sabina had taught me to trust without question. We'd built something solid in Seattle. My auto repair shop was thriving. She was climbing the corporate ladder as a sales manager, and our house in the suburbs felt like the American dream realized. Every morning, I'd wake up at 6, brew coffee for both of us, and we'd share those quiet moments before the day pulled us in different directions. She'd talk about her upcoming sales targets, and I'd mention which cars were coming into the shop. It was routine, comfortable, safe. Our house was a 2-story colonial we'd bought 3 years into our marriage. I'd renovated the garage myself, turning it into a workspace where I could tinker with classic cars on weekends. Sabina would bring me sandwiches and lemonade while I worked, sitting on an old stool and telling me about her day. Those were the moments I treasured most, the simple, unguarded intimacy of a shared life. She'd been married once before, briefly in her early 20s. It ended badly, she'd told me, but never gave many details. I never pressed. Everyone has a past. What mattered was our present, our future. At least, that's what I believed. The first sign came on a Wednesday in July. Sabina mentioned she'd be working late again, the 3rd time that week. Nothing unusual, really. Summer was always busy for her company. But when I called her office at 9 p.m. to ask if she wanted me to pick up dinner, her colleague Sophia answered. "Oh, Sabina left around 6, Sophia said cheerfully. She mentioned something about meeting a client for drinks downtown. My stomach tightened, but I pushed the feeling down. Sales managers meet clients. That's the job. Sabina came home just before 11. She looked tired, her makeup slightly smudged. "Long day?" I asked from the couch, keeping my voice casual. "Exhausting," she sighed, dropping her purse on the entry table. The presentation took forever, and then we had to discuss revisions with the client. I almost mentioned my call to Sophia. Almost asked why she'd left at 6 if the presentation took so long. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the instinct that once you start questioning, you can't stop. "There's pasta in the fridge if you're hungry," I said instead. "I ate already. I'm just going to shower and crash." I listened to the water run upstairs and wondered when my wife had become someone I couldn't talk to openly. The late nights continued. 3 more that week, then twice the following week. Each time, she had a reason: client dinners, team meetings, deadline crunches. Each time, I wanted to believe her. Marriage is built on trust, right? You can't second-guess every explanation, question every detail. That's not a partnership, that's paranoia. But the unease grew. Small things started standing out. The way she'd check her phone constantly, even during dinner. How she'd angled the screen away from me when typing. The new password she'd added. She claimed it was for security after reading an article about identity theft. "You can never be too careful," she'd said. I'd nodded, even though we'd never used passwords before. Then came the weekend trip. "I'm going to Las Vegas with some girlfriends," Sabina announced over breakfast on a Saturday morning in late July. "Just a quick girls' weekend. We all need a break." I looked up from my eggs. "Which friends?" "New ones from the gym. You don't know them." That was another thing. She'd joined a gym 3 months ago, saying she wanted to get back in shape. I'd been supportive, even encouraged it. But I'd never met these new friends she mentioned occasionally. Never even heard their names. "What gym friends?" I asked, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. "Just some women from my spin class. We've been talking about doing a trip for a while. Everyone's so stressed with work." Something about the way she said it, too casual, too rehearsed, made my skin prickle. But I smiled and told her to have fun. What else could I do? Accuse her based on a feeling? Demand to meet friends from her gym class? That wasn't the kind of husband I wanted to be. "When are you leaving?" I asked. "Friday morning. Early flight. I'll be back Sunday evening." "Sounds great. You deserve a break." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks for understanding." The rest of that week felt off. She seemed distracted, distant. When I tried to initiate intimacy on Wednesday night, she claimed she was too tired. Thursday, she stayed up late packing, and when I asked if she needed help, she said she had it under control. Friday morning, I woke up to find her already dressed, suitcase by the door. "You're leaving early," I mumbled, still half asleep. "Wanted to beat traffic to the airport. Go back to sleep." She kissed my forehead, a gesture that felt more dismissive than affectionate, and left. I spent that weekend in a fog. Saturday, I worked at the shop, trying to lose myself in a complicated transmission repair. I kept checking my phone, hoping for texts from Sabina. She sent a few generic updates about arriving safely, about the hotel being nice, about having fun. Nothing specific. Nothing that felt real. Sunday afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the grocery store, needing to get out of the house, needing to do something normal. That's where I ran into Samantha. Samantha had been Sabina's best friend since college. They'd been roommates, had been in each other's weddings, talked on the phone weekly. If anyone knew what was going on with my wife, it would be her. "Hey Rudolph." She gave me a hug in the produce section. "How are you holding up with Sabina gone?" "I'm managing," I said, grabbing a bag of apples I didn't need. "She'll be back tonight from Vegas." Samantha's smile froze. Her eyes widened slightly, and I watched the color drain from her face in real time. "Vegas?" she repeated, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Yeah, her trip with the girls from the gym." Samantha set down the tomato she'd been holding. Her hand was shaking slightly. "Rudolph, I didn't know she was going to Vegas. She told me she was visiting her sister in Portland." The grocery bag slipped from my hand. Apples rolled across the floor, bouncing on the linoleum, and I watched them scatter like my thoughts. "Her sister?" I repeated slowly, barely recognizing my own voice. Samantha looked like she wanted to disappear into the produce display. "Maybe I'm confused. I'm sorry, I should." "Her sister lives in Boston," I said quietly, mechanically. "And she's been there for 5 years. They haven't even spoken in months." We stood there in aisle 7, surrounded by scattered fruit and the quiet hum of refrigeration units, while my marriage crumbled in real time. Other shoppers moved around us, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just shifted off its axis. I left my cart in the aisle and walked out of the store. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 30 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd just learned. My wife had lied to her best friend about where she was going. Which meant she'd lied to me. Which meant Vegas wasn't about girlfriends or spin classes or needing a break. Vegas meant something else entirely. That night, when Sabina came home with a rolling suitcase and stories about slot machines and buffets and shows she'd seen, I said nothing. I kissed her cheek, asked about her trip, and watched her lie to my face with a practiced smile. She was good at it, too good. The details came easily, naturally. The story of winning $50 on a penny slot. The description of the hotel pool. The complaint about how expensive drinks were on the strip. This wasn't her first performance. "Sounds like you had a great time," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "I did. I really needed that." She yawned. "I'm exhausted though. Going to shower and crash." I watched her roll her suitcase upstairs and wondered how long she'd been lying to me. How many other trips had there been? How many late nights at the office were actually something else? Over the next week, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. I checked receipts when she left them on the counter. I noticed she'd started using a credit card I didn't recognize, not our joint account, something else. When I casually asked about it, she said it was a new rewards card from her bank, better cash back on purchases. "Just trying to be smart with money," she'd said with a shrug. I nodded and didn't push, but I made a mental note. I paid attention to her phone habits, how she'd take it to the bathroom now, even for just a minute, how she'd angle the screen away from me when sitting on the couch, how she'd started sleeping with it under her pillow instead of on the nightstand. The intimacy between us had evaporated. We hadn't made love since before her Vegas trip. When I tried to initiate anything, she always had an excuse. "Too tired. Not feeling well. Early meeting tomorrow." The rejection stung, but more than that, it confirmed what I already knew deep down. My wife was having an affair. But I needed proof. I needed to know for certain before I did anything irreversible. I didn't hire a detective. The thought crossed my mind, but I couldn't stomach the idea of paying a stranger to follow my wife. Plus, I had something better. Louis and Thad, 2 mechanics at my shop who'd become more like brothers over the years. Good men, loyal, discreet. More importantly, Louis's cousin worked security at several clubs in Las Vegas. I called Louis into my office one afternoon after the shop closed. Thad was there too, organizing parts in the storage room, but within earshot. "Boss, you sure you want to know?" Louis asked when I explained what I needed. "I'm sure." Louis pulled out his phone. "My cousin Tony works security at a few clubs on the Strip. Big places. If she was there with someone, there might be footage. Can he access that? For you?" "Yeah. He owes me anyway." Louis was already texting. What dates? I gave him the weekend Sabina had been gone. Lewis sent the information and we waited. We were standing in my office 3 days later. It was late afternoon, and the shop was quiet except for the distant sound of an air compressor. Lewis handed me a manila envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photos, digital prints from security footage, dated from the weekend Sabina was supposedly with her gym friends. The first image showed the entrance to a nightclub called Velvet Underground. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., Saturday night. The second photo made my breath catch. It showed the interior of the club, dance floor, lights, crowd. And there, in the center, was my wife. She wore a red dress I'd never seen before. Tight, short, nothing like the conservative clothes she wore to work or the casual outfits she wore at home. Her hair was styled differently, more elaborate. She looked like a different person. But it wasn't the dress that made my hands shake. It wasn't the unfamiliar hair or makeup. It was the man she was with. In every photo, she was wrapped around him, dancing, kissing, his hands on her waist, her hips, her back, her fingers tangled in his hair, her body pressed against his. The timestamps ran from midnight to 3 a.m., a progression of intimacy that left no room for doubt. This wasn't a chance encounter. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This was deliberate, passionate, real. I flipped through the photos, each one a fresh knife wound. There were at least a dozen images captured from different security cameras throughout the night. In some, they were dancing. In others, they were at the bar, his arm around her shoulders. In one particularly painful shot, they were in a dark corner, and I had to look away before I saw more. There's more, Lewis said quietly. Tony says she's been there before. At least 4 times in the past 2 months. Always with the same guy. My throat was too tight to speak. I just nodded. The guy's name is Edward. He's a dancer at the club. Works the main stage most nights. A dancer. My wife was having an affair with a Vegas dancer. I set the photos down carefully, afraid that if I held them any longer, I might tear them apart. Or tear apart something else, my office, my shop, myself. Thanks, Lewis, I managed to say. I appreciate this. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. After Lewis left, I sat in my office until the sun set and the shadows grew long. I stared at those photos until they blurred, until the images burned themselves into my memory. 6 years. 6 years of marriage, and this was what I'd been living. A lie. A performance. A betrayal so complete it felt like my entire history had been rewritten. But the betrayal cut deeper than the affair itself. It was the pattern I was starting to see. The separate credit card. The new phone habits. The practiced lies that came so easily. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness or a drunken night she'd regretted. This was a double life. How long had it been going on? For trips that Lewis's cousin knew about, but there could have been more. The late nights at work, were those affairs too? Different men? Or just more time with Edward? My mind raced through our recent months together, re-examining every moment through this new lens. The distance between us. The lack of intimacy. The way she'd pull away when I tried to hold her. I'd thought she was stressed with work. I'd thought maybe we were in a rut, that all marriages went through phases like this. I'd been blind. No, I'd been trusting. And she'd weaponized that trust. I thought about confronting her immediately. Driving home, throwing the photos on our kitchen table, and demanding answers. Demanding to know why. Demanding to know how long. Demanding to know if she'd ever actually loved me, or if our entire marriage had been a lie from the start. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the realization that I needed to be strategic. Because if I confronted her now, in the heat of rage and betrayal, she'd manipulate the narrative. She'd cry, apologize, blame stress or loneliness or some failing of mine. She'd promise it was over, that it meant nothing, that she'd never do it again. And some weak part of me might believe her. No. I needed time. I needed to think clearly. I needed to be smart about this. So I went home that night and pretended everything was normal. I asked about her day. I watched television beside her on the couch. I went to bed when she did, lying in the darkness while she slept peacefully next to me, completely unaware that her secret was no longer secret. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly gathering information. I became a detective in my own marriage, documenting everything. I photographed documents when she wasn't home. I made copies of statements from that mysterious credit card. It turned out she'd opened it 6 months ago, around the time the late nights started. The charges told a story. Flights to Vegas I didn't know about, not just the recent trip, but 3 others before it. Hotel rooms booked under her name. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. Charges from boutiques and lingerie stores. Spa treatments. Every purchase a piece of evidence, a fragment of the life she'd been living without me. She'd been planning this, living this. While I worked 60-hour weeks to build our future, expanding the shop, saving for the bigger house she wanted, sacrificing time and energy to give us security, she was building a fantasy with a man who danced for dollar bills. The rage came in waves, but I kept it locked down. I couldn't afford to let it out, not yet. Control was everything now. So I went to work each day. I came home each night. I kissed my wife goodnight. And I planned. I met with a lawyer named Thaddeus Ross. Thad from the shop had recommended him, said he'd handled his brother's messy divorce, and was tough but fair. The lawyer's office was downtown, tastefully decorated but impersonal. He was in his 50s, graying hair, sharp eyes that had probably seen every variation of betrayal and broken promises. I laid out everything. The photos, the credit card statements, the timeline of lies. He reviewed it all methodically, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "You want to do this right," he said finally, looking up at me. "Washington is a no-fault state, so technically you don't need any of this to get a divorce. But this level of deception? The separate finances, the hidden credit card, the systematic lying? We can use this strategically." "I don't want her destroyed," I said, surprising myself with the words. Despite everything, despite the rage and betrayal, I didn't want to ruin her life. I just wanted out. I just want out. Clean. Fair. And I want her to understand what she threw away. The lawyer smiled slightly. "I think we can arrange that." He explained the process. Washington's community property laws meant we'd split assets 50-50, unless we could prove she'd been using marital funds for the affair, which the credit card statements might demonstrate. But pursuing that route would be expensive, messy, and emotionally draining. "My advice," Ross said, "take the clean split. Keep your business. You started it before the marriage, so it's separate property anyway. Sell the house, divide the proceeds. Walk away with your dignity and your future intact." "What about her?" I asked. Ross leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Hoffman, in my experience, people like your wife don't get away with anything. The consequences might not be legal or financial, but they're real. Trust me on that." I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but I would. The plan was simple but required patience. We'd wait until I had everything documented, every asset accounted for, every lie cataloged. Then we'd file for divorce while she was at work, serve her at her office in front of her colleagues. Not out of cruelty. I wasn't trying to humiliate her, but because I needed her off balance, unable to hide or spin the story to her advantage. But I needed one more piece. I needed to know how deep this went. Was Edward special to her? Was this love or just physical? And more importantly, what was his side of this story? I created a fake social media profile. Just a generic account with a random name, a stock photo, some basic information. It felt dishonest, creating a fake identity. But then again, my wife had been living a fake life for months. It took me 2 days of searching, but I found Edward. His page was public, full of performance videos from the club, promotional photos showing off his physique, posts about upcoming shows. He was younger than me, late 20s probably. Fit, conventionally attractive in that generic, manufactured way. And there, scattered among his posts, were photos that confirmed my worst suspicions. Him at upscale restaurants. Him at luxury hotels. Him posing in front of expensive cars. And in 3 of the photos, barely visible in the background or cropped at the edge of the frame, I could see her. My wife. Sabina. She'd been so careful, never fully in frame, never tagged, never identified. But I knew her well enough to recognize her. The curve of her shoulder, the color of her hair, the jewelry I'd given her for our anniversary. The comments on his posts told me everything else I needed to know. Dozens of women fawning over him. Him flirting back shamelessly, leaving suggestive comments, encouraging their attention. Edward wasn't building a future with Sabina. He wasn't in love. He was using her the way he used all of them, for attention, for validation, for money, for the thrill. She'd thrown away our marriage for a man who would never choose her. A man who was probably juggling multiple women, playing them all, giving each one just enough attention to keep them hooked. In a strange way, this realization hurt almost as much as the affair itself. If she'd left me for someone who truly loved her, someone who wanted to build a life with her, maybe I could have understood. Maybe I could have accepted that we'd grown apart, that she'd found something real with someone else. But this This was just empty, meaningless. She destroyed everything we had for a fantasy that was never going to be real. 3 weeks after discovering the truth, I was ready. The divorce papers were prepared, the asset division documented, the strategy set. We'd split everything down the middle, the house sale proceeds, the savings, the furniture. I didn't want her money. I wanted my freedom and my self-respect. But I also wanted her to feel what I felt. Not through cruelty or revenge, but through truth. Through the natural consequences of her choices. But I also wanted her to feel what I felt. On a Thursday evening, Sabina came home from work early, which was unusual. She seemed agitated. "Rough day?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I got served with papers," she said, her voice shaking. "At my office. In front of everyone." I looked up from my dinner plate. "What kind of papers?" Her eyes were red. "Don't play dumb, Rudolph. Divorce papers." I set down my fork carefully. "Oh, those. Her voice rose. "You're divorcing me and you didn't even have the decency to tell me first? Like you had the decency to tell me about Edward." The color drained from her face. "Or the trips to Vegas," I continued calmly. "Or the separate credit card. Or the 4 months of lies." She sat down heavily. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to make copies of everything. Long enough to talk to a lawyer. Long enough to realize our marriage ended a while ago. I just didn't know it yet." "Rudolph, please. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Sabina. You made your choice. I'm just making mine. It was a mistake. Edward means nothing. I love you." I laughed, surprising myself with how bitter it sounded. "You love me? You spent 6 months sneaking around with a dancer in Vegas, lying to my face every single day, and you love me." "It wasn't 6 months. Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't insult me more than you already have. I know about the first trip in February. I know about the hotel rooms. I know about the money you spent on him." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I'll end it. I'll never see him again. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix. It's over. Please, Rudolph. I made a terrible mistake. Don't throw away 6 years over this." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but emptiness where love used to be. "I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that." Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings moved forward with brutal efficiency. Sabina tried everything: tears, anger, bargaining, showing up at my shop, calling my mother, having her friends reach out to me. Nothing worked. The asset division was straightforward. We sold the house and split the proceeds. I kept the business. I'd started it before we met. She kept her car and her savings. We split the furniture and the bank accounts. But the real punishment wasn't financial. It was social. Word spread fast in our circle. When people asked me what happened, I didn't lie or protect her. I simply told the truth. She'd been having an affair for months, lying about trips, living a double life. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. Her reputation at work suffered. Her friends took sides, and most sided with me. Her family was mortified. Her mother actually called to apologize to me, which somehow made it all worse. And Edward? According to Lewis's cousin Tony, Sabina flew to Vegas one more time after the divorce papers were served. This was about 2 weeks into the proceedings, when she was still in denial about everything falling apart. She went to find Edward at the club. According to Tony, who heard about it from other staff, she confronted him during his break. She told him about the divorce. She told him she was leaving her husband. She asked him to leave with her, to start over somewhere new, to make their relationship real. He laughed at her. It turned out Edward had been seeing at least 3 other women the whole time. All of them married. All of them thinking they were special. He'd perfected the routine, the attention, the affection, the illusion of intimacy. Just enough to keep them hooked, to keep them coming back, to keep them spending money on him. Sabina was just another mark. Another ego boost. Another source of free meals and validation. She'd destroyed her marriage, her reputation, her friendships, her family relationships, all for a man who never cared about her at all. The divorce was finalized on a gray October morning. We met one last time at Ross's office to sign the final papers. Sabina looked terrible. She'd lost weight, probably 15 pounds, and it didn't look good on her. She'd always been slim, but now she looked gaunt. The confidence she used to carry like armor was completely gone. She couldn't even meet my eyes as we signed our names on document after document. I walked out of that office a free man. The Seattle rain was falling, cold and cleansing. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting it soak through my jacket. 6 years of marriage gone. But as I drove back to my shop, my business, my future, mine alone, I realized something important. Sabina didn't just lose a husband. She lost someone who would have given her everything, who trusted her completely, who built a life with her brick by brick. She traded security for excitement, loyalty for passion, reality for fantasy. And when the fantasy evaporated, she was left with nothing but the wreckage she created. I heard through mutual friends that she tried to date, but word of her affair had spread. People knew. They talked. Seattle's a big city, but some communities are small, and reputations matter. She eventually took a job in another state, needing a fresh start away from the whispers and the judgment. Meanwhile, I focused on my business. The shop expanded. I hired 2 more mechanics. I bought a small condo downtown with a view of the water. I started going to a boxing gym, not to prepare for anything, just to feel strong again. Some nights, I thought about what I could have done differently. Whether I missed signs earlier. Whether I should have fought harder. But mostly, I just felt relief. Relief that I discovered the truth. Relief that I didn't waste another 6 years. Relief that I had the strength to walk away. Sabina chose her path. She chose the lies, the deception, the temporary thrill of a Vegas dancer who never cared about her. And she got exactly what she deserved, nothing. Not because I destroyed her. Not because I took revenge in some dramatic fashion. But because the natural consequences of her choices, the lost trust, the damaged reputation, the realization that she traded something real for something worthless, were punishment enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to someone. It's what they do to themselves. I moved forward. I rebuilt. And somewhere in another state, Sabina lived with the knowledge that she had something precious and threw it away for a man who never wanted her at all. 6 years of marriage ended not with a bang, but with signatures on paper and a woman walking away alone, finally understanding the true cost of betrayal. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.